All right, Jack, thanks for joining me today. Really excited to dig into a little bit of your story um, and learn more about you. And let's find some ways to help. Let's get those tough questions answered that you have that have been popping up for you. So, Jack, I see you're going to Boston University. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, what you're studying, and what do you hope to do with it after school?
Yeah, of course, man. I'd be happy to. So, hi, my name is Jack Stappenbeck. I'm a sophomore at Boston College. I'm originally from Ridgewood, New Jersey. I was raised, grew up there my entire life, and then I went to Regis High School in New York, a Jesuit institution. I'd gone to Catholic school throughout my time before then, and then being a Regis, a Jesuit institution, I kind of saw a unique perspective towards that, which led me to BC, seeing like how it applied the Jesuit values in terms of education of the whole self, understanding religion through a Jesuit context. So that led me to BC. And I knew when I got there, I wanted to study numbers. I originally applied as a math, business analytics major. I'm a huge baseball fan, big into analytics, data. All of that was really fascinating to me. And then I started gravitating more towards finance just because I saw it wasn't data alone, but understanding how that data worked, being able to present that data to a supervisor, a client, other team members. So like having that communication skills and the qualitative side balanced with the quantitative is really what interested me and shifted me more towards a financial sense. So that's why I'm here now in my sophomore year, getting ready to do investment banking recruiting, planning on going into that field because of that marriage between those two. And I'm happy to talk about any of that or explain any of it more.
Okay, awesome. No, thanks for walking me through that. Yeah, I think it's a cool route. Understanding the numbers and being really comfortable with the math is a great place of strength to come from. Because the qualitative piece tends to be like it's all very learnable. Um, and so I think it's a great place to come from. At the end of the day, one thing that you're going to want to find a way to communicate in your interviews and learn more how to do this, but it's about telling stories through numbers, right? It's not just about putting data up and show one bar bigger than the other, but how do those numbers tell a story? And when you're able to really understand the math, but also the qualitative pieces of what's behind that, what does it really look like in real life? When you see a number that says inventory, what does that mean really? Right? What is that? Is that like pallets of toilet paper sitting on a shelf somewhere? Is that some kind of digital asset? Like what are we talking about? So really most important thing of that, which I like what you said that you should tap further into, is really talking about when have you told stories through numbers, right? And use those numbers to tell a story. Really important in banking. So cool. No, that's kind of one nugget that I got from your intro. Um, so I guess the first question I've got here for you is, what this process keeps getting early and earlier. What should I be doing my freshman year, and how do I deal with it when this process keeps getting earlier and earlier? Anything you wanted to elaborate on that question?
Yeah, I guess I mean I came in going and I had an idea of what I wanted to do. I knew just going into college I wanted like my biggest priority and the thing that like my parents reinforced. I had great mentorship from the get go was like crush it with your grades. I think whether or not you want to go into investment banking recruiting in your sophomore year, or if you're worried about a 10-year med school timeline, I think crushing it with your grades is very, very important. And obviously, like, everyone wants to balance that with an active social life, getting involved with clubs, and all of that is important. I would say it primarily starts with your grades and making sure like you go in and put your best foot forward and whatever that might be acceptable with the outcome. And you at the end of the day, like you don't know when you're going to decide what you want to do, when you're going to want to put that step forward for some kind of recruiting, some kind of master's business school master's degree, whatever it might be. Like you can't really control when you might decide on that. You can control how well you do in the time being, right? And what you're going to do and how to maximize the most out of that school is crushing it with your grades and then figuring out who you could talk to figure out that later half. Do you want to go to master? To get your master's? Do you want to go on to have an internship that could lead to full time work in whatever field afterwards? Especially if you're talking about the banking recruiting process, getting early, making sure you crush it with your grades and find the people who have gone through that similar process and getting to know them. I think if you do either of those two things, you're going to be in a very, very, very good position come your sophomore year, come later in your freshman year, whenever you might want to actually get started with the process.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I mean, look, no question, grades matter, and that's that's it's a great place of solid foundation that you can always come from and feel confident about, and that's 100% true. You know, don't forget to make friends, have fun while you're at school as well. You know, but I think a couple things that I would say, you mentioned the master's degree as kind of one of these possibilities. I'm just going to tell you, I have a very strong view on that. And I would say for the vast majority of people, a master's degree is the wrong answer until you get about 4 to 6 years of working experience under your belt. That's my recommended range. You can be successful and have less experience. I'm not saying that you can't, but I'm just saying I recommend getting out in the workforce, working for at least 4 years before pursuing a master's degree, unless you're in a job that requires a master's degree for some whatever reason, like being an architect does. But most jobs don't, and the reason is you're going to get a lot more out of that master's program after you've had experience in industry, like a lot more. You're also going to be able to use that master's as a platform to get closer to where you want to be, closer to where you want to do. You're going to learn a lot about yourself in your first two jobs. Let's say you work two jobs, 3 years each, and that's 6 years. That's a good start. That's a great start to a career. That's the time to get the MBA. Is at that point, if it is an MBA, or maybe you never know, Jack. Like you might decide that you want to be a computer scientist, and you might go get a master's degree in computer science. You don't know that, right? So by pushing off the master's degree, you give yourself that optionality. You see what I'm saying? To get work experience, figure out more about yourself and what you like and don't like, and then use that master's degree as a springboard into something that's adjacent or slightly different. Or it might be the MBA route, obviously. So that's something to think about too on the master's degree. Since you mentioned it, I just have to kind of dive into that because I think it's so important, and I think it's a very common mistake. And I think after COVID, I think more people are making that mistake. To be quite frank, a lot of folks get comfortable with school. It's familiar, and they just keep on. They just because finding a job is stressful, right? It's tough. So that's what to think about. Also, too, so you also mentioned kind of the early process. I mean, the processes are getting earlier and earlier, but also too, you got to recognize. I mean, so you're Boston University, you're coming out of a non-target school. You've got a lot of rain, to get on people's radars early. What are you, a freshman or sophomore?
Sophomore.
You're a sophomore. Okay. So, I mean, you're coming into it. You're going to be interviewing here in the winter, right? Late winter, early spring, something like that for that junior year internship. And so the way you navigate that process is the good news is at least the timeline's not a mystery. When you say moving it earlier and earlier, the thing is, yes, over a decade, are they getting earlier and earlier? Yeah, but that's got no impact to you. The good news is that, right, it's not going to change while you're in it and you're going to miss deadlines or something. No, you know what the deadlines are. I mean, right now, people are building those lists. You need to be getting on banks' non-target schools selection process and get on those lists, your top banks. Someone's running that process. You need to know who that name of that person is, and that's the only way you're going to get that first round interview. Is if you know, oh, this vice president and this analyst are running off-campus recruiting, was what they call it, or non-target school recruiting, or we usually call it off-campus. And they kind of bucket all these schools together. You're competing against whatever Indiana University and Iowa State and Michigan State and Georgia Tech, all these kind of different schools you're competing against now. You've got to get on that list, and the only way to do that is to talk to as many people in that bank as you can and ask them who's running your non-target school recruiting, who's running your off-campus program. Have you gotten in touch with anyone who's running an off-campus program at any bank?
Well, I'm actually sorry to don't mean to correct you. I'm at Boston College, so so far we've had like all of the banks have come to campus. So I've
Oh,
mostly
Boston.
been doing
Okay.
with BC, yes, with
All
BC
right.
people. Yeah,
Great, great, great.
yeah,
Okay. Then I got mixed up. Thank you.
no problem, no
Um,
problem.
but you could stop me sooner. Don't let me go off on some long
No,
tangent here. Okay, great. So what kind of banks then suit? I mean, again, that's a beauty. That's a leg up. That's awesome. So what banks are you looking at from the recruiting, from school recruiting?
it's been pretty open ended so far. Like RBC came to campus a couple weeks ago, and I had one of my phenomenal mentor, who's there now, as it was a senior. So I talked to him a couple weeks before, and then I had gotten the chance to talk to several people who I'd previously met with, just before at an info session. And like right now, I'm pretty open ended. in terms of what I want to do. So I've talked to people, at boutiques with Moelis in New York and Boston. I've talked to people at Barclays, people at Citi. So it's kind of it's very open ended in terms of what I'm
Yeah,
looking for right now. And I guess over the next couple months, I'm going to be looking to hone in
gotta
on
hone in.
what I'd want to do and what type of environment
Good.
I want to be in.
You want to start broad. Talk to a lot of different types of bank, as many as you can, right? And your goal is to really ask them, like, what do you love about your job? What do you love about where you work? What do you hate about your job? What do you hate about where you work? And I recommend using that word hate because it evokes emotion. Like, whoa, hate. Well, I don't hate anything, but if I would change something, here's what it would be. Like, you can have a really rich conversation when you do that. Um, so I definitely recommend that. Yeah, it's good to hear about the variety of banks. One little tweak on your language though, Moelis. I wouldn't call Moelis a. I don't. Do they? I don't think they call themselves a boutique. I think they call themselves more of an independent bank.
Okay.
Um, is probably the term, but make sure you're modeling that after the people who work there themselves, because you won't understand a bank until you've talked to about 10 people who work at that bank, and you better understand how does the bank view itself. How does the bank view itself? How does it position itself to potential clients? How does the bank view itself amongst its competitors? Who is that competitive set? Who are they winning and who do they taking deals from? Who are they losing deals to? These are the questions that really start to define who that bank is. And I would say Moelis is usually going to be referred to more of an independent bank because these banks are like publicly traded, almost size, so they're big. They're not boutiques. Boutique might only have five MDs or something like that. A boutique would be more like an oil and a 20-person oil and gas industry focused shop in Houston, right? That's more of a typical or a traditional boutique. So again, picking up this language is really, really important. And so that's why I bring it up. So that's the other benefit of talking to a lot of people. Um, and also too, just so you know, Adventus has a recruiting program where we actually cover all these different types of banks, the lingos and the lingo and the definition. So it's something to check out. Um, all right. What other questions are popping up for you as we're going through things here?
I guess it'd just be like I know like I've talked to people on campus about when the timeline that you want to start. Like I know that the M&I guide is a big key, and like right now I've been on the phone with some people, but obviously that process ramps up as you get closer to the deadlines. I guess what people should be looking out for when you want to like plan accordingly, because lots of the stuff is it's very vague. If you don't know the right people, can talk to the right mentors, it can be very hard to understand what the timeline looks like for this kind of stuff, because lots of it's you need to have someone on the inside who's done it before who can walk you through it properly.
Yeah, but and just during your networking though, ask, what do you know about the recruiting timeline? Like you got to be gathering your own intel. Don't just expect so I guess what I would say, be careful with what you're saying. Don't, someone's not going to walk you through it. Maybe if you have like a really great alumni who's running your process and they've said, reach out to me, I'll answer all your questions. That's great if you have that. But otherwise, gather your own intel. Ask if you talk to five people at a bank, hey, what should I be looking out for next in the recruiting timeline? That's a very fair question. It's about logistics. Hey, I want to move forward. How do I make sure I get into that interview list? What else do I need to do? What advice do you have for me? Remember, always frame it as advice. You're not asking for a favor, you're not asking for inside information. You're just asking for advice, the same advice that they would give anybody who's asking that question, right? Um, so that's hopefully that's helpful. And congrats on earning the Adventist certification. What Yeah, what do you think what what was most important to you for learning in terms of that experience? What did you get? What was the most important thing you got out of it?
I think going through the model, because I teach Adventist as well, so I've gone through the model myself several times, and I think seeing how it all fits together, like how the puzzle pieces connect throughout the entirety, from the interest, from the income statement through LBO, and understanding like how those line items, because like now when I walk myself through it, comprehensively, and like as a content based conceptually, like I understand like what leads to what and how they flow into one another, because I've gone through the steps myself and seen how they connect in the Excel sheet.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and you also too ask like, hey, where am I at in this process? How do I deal with it? Get earlier and earlier. I mean, you get this good training up front, and now you're set up for those interviews. And in those additional conversations. I think one of the most important things you do get out, and you tell me if this was your experience, but you learn more about the language, right? It's not just the modeling, but also the valuation for level two. Did you get level two as well?
I
You
did,
did, right?
yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So especially on level two, that's great. So, and now, and also too, if you're a student trainer as well. Yep. Okay. Awesome. That's even a higher standard of modeling. Draw attention to that. Tell people about what you accomplished there in terms of building the model under the very tight time constraints and accuracy requirements. Um, that's something to be proud of. And quite frankly, a lot of bankers can't do that in terms of build a fully circular three statement model in 90 minutes or 60 minutes, right? So that's really cool. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing else for you to do besides go crazy with networking as much as possible. Let me ask you this: of the banks you have talked to, you mentioned that a wide variety of banks you had been in some level of engagement with. Which ones are coming out to you as more interesting than others?
Honestly, right now it's just all about the people for me. Like, because if you're gonna be putting investment banking level hours, like I want to love the person next to me. I want to have be able to people I can go and have a great time with afterwards on the weekend as well. Like, if we finish, working at 2 a.m., are we gonna go have somebody to eat, somebody to drink afterwards? Like, that's what's the biggest thing for me. And so far, like I've talked to a lot of people at RBC just because the nature of they came to campus first, and like all of them have been phenomenal. I really, really liked all of them. Barclays came a couple weeks ago. I talked to several people in person, and now I've had a call last week. Have another one coming up. Like they've all been amazing. So for me, it's all about the people, and like so far, those two have stood out with just a fantastic, fantastic folks all
Great,
around.
great, great, great. Well, definitely double down on the networking on those two. You really want to be on a list, have a list of about 3 to 5 banks that you like and you really want to invest into with conversations. um, 3 to 5 banks you want to have talked to a minimum of 3 to 5 people, and that's like bare minimum. You want to go beyond that, but that's cool. RBC is great, man. I think that's a good example of like kind of a are they more middle market, or are they, where do they play?
They're probably like I'd say they're in between middle market and top. Like
Kind of upper middle market.
yeah, brand themselves like as a bigger player. They talk about how they finance lots of their own deals, but as you said, like they not, maybe not have like the same kind of name and recognition notoriety as like a Morgan Stanley, Goldman, JPM.
Right. I think you can get a lot of mileage out of banks like that. That's why I preferred Baird. I got a great experience at Baird, because it's not wasn't one of the big universal banks, because you get a JP Morgan. That bank is so massive. Chase, you've got Citibank. These are universal banks. They're hundreds of billions of dollars. It's going to be very different than a Lazard, which is going to be very different than a Baird or an RBC. Yeah, I like it. I think you get a lot of mileage because that bank might not get as much, fewer people are hunting down RBC than, say, Morgan Stanley, right, or Goldman Sachs. And so when you guys have sounds like you have a really strong alumni group there, which can really help to create that positive culture for you, get to know people sooner, know more people when you get there. Um, and yeah, so I think I would recommend pursuing RBC and learning more about that. I think that sounds like a great plan. Barclays is great too. Um, that was kind of the two banks that I went far with, because I actually kind of came from a similar perspective. My recruiting process was Chicago. I wanted banking in Chicago, the group that I like the best. That's it, and it was a lot about people and culture of the bank. And everybody says that, but the only way you really understand is if you talk to a lot of people, like you said. So I think you got the right approach. Now you're going to need to tell them that you're going to need to develop more answers. So your real goal is to learn about RBC, like I mentioned before. How does the bank view itself? Does RBC view it, because it probably competes with Goldman Sachs, quite frankly, on a lot of stuff. Even at Baird, Goldman Sachs would try to reach into the upper middle market a lot of times, and Baird and Goldman Sachs would be competing. A lot of people don't realize that, or understand that. They think Goldman Sachs is only competing with, JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley, but that's not true. And so again, how does the bank view itself? And then imagine, let's say they do view themselves as a competitor to Goldman Sachs. Then you can say things like, well, I'd rather be here than Goldman Sachs because of this, that, and the other thing. Oh my gosh, they eat that stuff up, right? Because they're very competitive. So you've got to know who those competitors are. And, it's okay to say why that competitor isn't a good fit. They love to hear stuff like that. So that's another thing to think about. What else is on your mind? What are you finding most difficult?
I guess now just because like earlier on in the semester might have been easier with lack of work, but like now as midterms start to pick up, people have talked about like how you balance like your finance classes with learning more and practical like finance experience and like understanding the networking with classes with prepping for technical. So it's for anyone who wants to do it, it's a lot, right? It's like I feel like your networking alone and the technical interview prep alone are in each in their own right in a separate class you're taking
Yeah,
beyond your regular course load. So just
no
balancing all
question.
that is definitely a big, big, big struggle, or rather
It's
like a
tough.
big demand. Yeah,
Yeah, it's tough. There's just no way around it. Um, Also know it's also a prerequisite for the job, right? That's one of the ways the banking and recruiting process is designed the way it is. It is time intensive. It is labor intensive, and so is banking. And so the people who can't manage all that aren't going to get the job because they can't manage all of it, right? But the people who do, who show they can manage all of it, who continue to put the work in even when they're tired and still do that studying even though they don't feel like it, those are the ones who are going to be more successful when they do get on the job eventually anyway. And it's not for everybody. You say, how do you manage it? I mean, it isn't for everybody. um, and so but there's no short. Now, definitely find ways to be efficient with your time. I think that's kind of the other thing, is it's work smarter, not harder. Like, you have these objectives to get done. Find the smart way to get it done that can gets it done faster, accurately. um, because where people really lose a lot of time is in reworking things, fixing mistakes, a lot of things like that. And so then something that takes 3 hours ends up taking 9 hours. But yeah, man, I unfortunately don't have any great. That's probably the area I have the least amount of advice for. You can look at Stephen Covey's, whatever, 7 Habits of Successful People or whatever. There's stuff like that out there, obviously. But working with the end in mind. I think another thing that's helpful too nowadays is, like, there's a lot of distractions out there, right? It's always been the case, but it's even more so the case today than it was 10 years ago. Whether that be on the phone, on the computer, whatever, socially. But there's a lot of distractions. So when you are sitting down to do work, compartmentalize, block everything else out, laser focus on what you're trying to do right that moment, and spend 15 or 30 dedicated minutes knocking out whatever you're trying to knock out, and just close out everything else. Figuring out how to do that is going to be one of the main things that'll help you succeed. Where people get destroyed is they know they need to do something, they start doing it, they get distracted, they come back to it 2 minutes later, and they're just kind of constantly doing context. We call it context changing, where they're constantly changing context, from writing this letter to shopping for this thing to then talking to someone. And whenever you change context, there's a cost to it. It's like a startup cost. So the more you're changing context and flipping back and forth between different things, the actually less efficient you're getting. So avoid multitasking. When you have a tough thing to do, put your blinders on, um, and just put your head down and get it done. Even if you don't, again, that's kind of the willpower thing. But it's probably not great advice, but like, that's the best advice I have. And just know that it is a prerequisite for the job. So you're going to be learning about how to manage your time through this process, right? You might even talk about that in the interview process, right? What changes did you have to make to how you were managing your time in order to get all this stuff done? Like, you know, that would be a really good thing to be able to articulate for you.
yeah, I appreciate. Yeah, I think definitely seeing that this week. Like sometimes people talk about like avoiding a 9 a.m. class, and like just because you have a 9 a.m. class doesn't mean you have to get up early because you have work. And I feel like those days when I have to get up early and then I get out earlier, I get more
You get more
accomplished.
done. Yeah, that was my strategy during my MBA. I preferred we had 8:30 a.m. classes, and I still had a 30-minute commute to school. So I'm leaving at 6:30 in the morning, or 6 7 in the morning, and then getting there at like 7:30, 7:45, an hour before class starts, and then I'm doing some work, early class, and yeah, I work straight through the day, and by 5 p.m. I'm done because I've gone to all my classes, I've gotten all my homework done, everything is taken care of, my networking, whatever I needed to get done that day. Boom, 5 p.m. hits, and I go home to my family because I was married with kids at the time. But I agree with you. I mean, you got to find what works for you. Though it's just, that's just common sense. That's why people get up. The most productive people get up early, And I think that's, I'm sure we can find different studies that show that's true, but it's just common sense. If you start working at 6 a.m., you're going to get a lot more done by 6 p.m. than the person who slept until 10, right? So, um, doesn't mean you don't sleep in once in a while, but it just means you build that habit. And I agree with you, just getting in and starting early. Even if it's just getting up, dragging yourself out of bed to go for a run or go to the gym or even just get a coffee and read a book, just something to get moving and get the brain working. So,
Appreciate the time, Ben, and I definitely, it benefited a lot to be on here, and I appreciate it.
okay. Yeah, look, man, no, nothing else here. I think feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. I'm here to be helpful. If any other questions pop up for you, happy to help. But look, man, you just got to get in there, keep talking. Also, get those referrals. In terms of a new contact from the person you're talking to, that's the best way to keep it going. You're a detective, right? You're following up on leads. Don't let the trail run cold. All right. Make sure you tap into that alumni database, especially in off the beaten path office locations. Look, I mean, you can contact someone in any Barclays office. So talk to someone in Chicago, talk to someone in what is it, San Diego. I don't even know where else they have offices. So they do have other offices. You're going to see a different dynamic when you start talking about locations. That could actually be a secret weapon for you. Because I know at Barclays, this was back for MBA recruiting 10 years ago, but the way they did it was Chicago made different decisions than New York. And you actually had to apply to both if you wanted to be considered like they were totally separate banks, right? So making sure you know the nuances of their process. If you want to, if being in San Diego is an option for you or Chicago is an option for you, um, then you're going to want to make sure you're getting in those processes, which might be totally separate. Now, all that stuff can change on a year-to-year basis, so you really have to have up-to-date information from the bank itself.